It is time, sister. Walk with grace. We are here with you. Did you see the look he gave her?
She told me everything last night. She is so ready for this.
Look how beautiful she looks. He is going to be stunned when he sees her.
The morning sun spilled through the carved wooden shutters, casting golden stripes across the room. Amara stood in front of the mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed the folds of her robe. Today was the day she had dreamed of since she was a little girl, her wedding day. Her heart raced with excitement, yet a knot of nervousness tightened deep in her chest. She was about to walk into a room full of her family, wearing a dress that reflected her spirit, bold, unique, and unapologetically her own. Her sisters had always been complicated. They were sharp, clever, and fiercely critical, each in their own way. First, there was Saad, the eldest, whose eyes carried a judgment that could cut through steel. She prided herself on her traditional tastes and often measured others against her impossible standards. Then came Lila, the middle sister, whose laughter was quick and often cruel, especially when she saw something she didn't approve of. She thrived on comparison, making sure everyone knew when someone fell short. And finally, little Nia, who had a quieter presence but a sly, biting wit that could make even the most confident person doubt themselves. Together, they had been Amara's constant mirrors of doubt, reflecting back insecurities she sometimes didn't know she had. Amara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She knew her sisters were capable of undermining her, even unintentionally. Memories of past humiliations flashed before her eyes. The time Saad mocked her choice of school, Lila laughed at her first job promotion, and Nia made comments about her hair that left her small and exposed. Even as adults, those moments had lingered, leaving traces of self-doubt that she carried silently. Yet there was a fire inside her, a sense of individuality she refused to hide. Her wedding dress, a vibrant fusion of traditional African motifs with a contemporary cut, was a statement. It was elegant, regal, and unlike anything her sisters would expect. It carried beads and embroidery that told stories of her heritage, bold patterns that reflected her personality, and a flowing silhouette that embodied freedom. This dress was more than fabric. It was courage stitched into every seam. The room buzzed with the sounds of preparation, distant voices of the wedding planner calling out details, the clatter of trays, and the soft hum of music. Amara's mind, however, was on her sisters. She imagined their reactions, the way Saad might furrow her brow, Lila might tilt her head with a smirk, and Nia might whisper under her breath. Even with her fiancé waiting at the altar, part of her worried whether her family would see her for who she truly was or only through the lens of judgment. Her mother appeared at the doorway, holding a tray of tea, and gave her a gentle smile. "You look radiant, Amara. Today is your day," she said softly. But even in her mother's warmth, there was a shadow, a silent worry about how her daughters treated one another. Amara nodded, sipped the tea, and felt the heat of anticipation rise in her chest. The sisters arrived soon after, each carrying themselves with an air of superiority. Sada's dress was immaculately traditional, perfect in every sense. Lila's style was bold yet polished, and Nia's subtle elegance held a sharpness that could pierce hearts. They greeted Amara with polite smiles, but Amara could feel the tension prickling like static electricity in the air. Each glance, each tilt of a head, seemed to weigh her down, yet she lifted her chin higher, determined not to show the tremor of anxiety beneath her composed exterior. As she prepared to reveal the dress later that morning, the room seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment that had always felt inevitable, a collision between who she truly was and the expectations her sisters had silently placed upon her. She wanted their approval, yes, but more than that, she wanted to walk into the room with confidence, to stand tall in her truth, and to let the beauty of her heritage shine through. A single bead of sweat slid down her temple as she caught her reflection again. This dress, this day, this moment, it was hers. And no criticism, no whisper, no mocking glance could take that away. Her heart pounded like a drum, echoing with courage, anticipation, and the quiet defiance of a young woman ready to claim her place. Today, everything would change, and Amara was ready to step into it, one heartbeat at a time. The moment finally came. Amara's hands shook slightly as she stepped toward the mirror, the folds of her wedding dress spilling around her like liquid gold. The room, already thick with tension, seemed to hush in anticipation. Her heart beat loudly, a drum that matched the rhythm of her apprehension. Today her sisters would see the dress, her statement, her courage, her identity, fully for the first time. Saad was the first to enter the room. She paused mid-step, her sharp eyes narrowing as she took in the intricate patterns, the beadwork that told stories of generations past, the bold cut that made Amara look regal yet modern. For a moment there was silence. Then a faint, incredulous laugh escaped Sada's lips. "Amara, are you serious?" Sada's tone was sharp, dripping with disbelief. This is your wedding dress?" Amara's stomach tightened. She had anticipated critique, but the venom in Sada's voice made it sting sharper than she expected. She straightened her back, forcing a calm she didn't entirely feel. "Yes, Saad," she said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. Lila stepped forward, her eyes dancing with a mix of amusement and mockery. "It's very colorful," she said, her words carefully measured to sound polite but heavy with ridicule. "I suppose you think it's fashionable?" She tilted her head, letting the statement hang in the air like a challenge. Nia, the youngest, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, her lips curved in a half-smile that carried the sting of sarcasm. "Bold choice, Amara," she murmured. "Very bold indeed. Not everyone would understand it." Amara's chest tightened. Each sister's words, each glance, was like a pinprick to her heart. She had chosen this dress to honor her roots while celebrating her individuality. She had imagined walking down the aisle, proud and radiant, the dress reflecting her identity. But now their laughter, their judgment, threatened to shrink her confidence to nothing. Memories surfaced unbidden, sharp as knives. The time she had presented her first artwork in school and Saad had rolled her eyes, whispering to the teacher that it was childish. The moment Lila had smirked when Amara received a scholarship, muttering, "Well, that's just luck, isn't it?" And the quiet, cruel comments Nia had made about Amara's hairstyle, making her feel out of place at family gatherings. Each memory was a ghost in the room, reminding her of how often her sisters had undermined her. Her hands clutched the fabric of the dress as if drawing strength from it. I love it," she whispered to herself, "more than to anyone else. It's me. It's who I am." The sisters exchanged looks, their judgment unspoken but heavy in the air. Saad stepped closer, tracing the embroidered patterns with a finger as though inspecting a museum artifact. "I just don't understand it," she said, her voice dropping to a mutter. "It's unusual. People will stare." Lila giggled, loud and piercing. "Oh, they will stare all right. But for the wrong reasons," she said, letting her words cut through the room like glass. "I mean, who wears this? It's so different." Even Nia couldn't resist, shaking her head slightly. "You really think this will impress anyone? It's unconventional. Very unconventional." Her tone held the quiet cruelty of someone who knew exactly how to wound without words. Amara felt the walls closing in, the room spinning slightly. She could hear the whispers of her own doubts echoing in her mind, amplified by their derision. The years of subtle humiliation, the constant comparisons, all surged forward in a painful wave. She had always wanted her sister's approval, had longed for their smiles and pride. Yet now, in what should have been one of the happiest moments of her life, that longing felt like a trap. But then a small voice within her whispered back. A memory of her grandmother's words, spoken years ago as they had sewn a ceremonial robe together. "Child, a dress can tell who you are if you have the courage to wear it." Amara drew a slow, deliberate breath, letting her fingers brush the beads on her dress. The patterns felt alive beneath her touch, each stitch a connection to her ancestry, to the stories of strength and resilience that ran through her veins. This dress was not just for her sisters to judge, it was for herself, for her fiancé, for the legacy she carried forward. She looked at Saad, Lila, and Nia with newfound clarity. Yes, they had mocked her, and yes, their words stung. But their approval was not required for her happiness. Her heart, her choices, her identity, they were her own. The wedding planner, a kind woman who had worked with Amara for months, stepped forward quietly. "It's beautiful, Amara," she said softly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "This dress is perfect for you. Walk in it with pride." A cousin, peeking from the doorway, nodded with admiration. "I've never seen anything like it," he said. "You look incredible." These small voices of support were like flickering lights in the dark, reminding Amara that even amidst criticism, there were allies, there were those who saw her truth. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and drew a deep breath that carried both fear and determination. "I know it's different," she said quietly, speaking more to herself than to her sisters. "But this is me, and I will wear it with my head held high." Her sisters watched her, a mix of confusion and disbelief on their faces. They expected tears, hesitation, a retreat into conformity. But Amara did none of that. She stood firmly, serene in her conviction, the dress glowing with the richness of her heritage and the courage of her spirit. In that moment, the air seemed to crackle with anticipation. The day was far from over, and the confrontation was only beginning. But Amara had found a small but fierce resolve. She would not allow their judgment to define her. The mockery might sting, but it could not break her. Not today. As the room quieted, the distant sounds of wedding preparations continued, a soft hum that promised the world outside was waiting. Amara's eyes flicked to the mirror one last time. The reflection staring back at her was not afraid. It was strong, radiant, and ready. The stage was set. Soon, she would walk into a room full of family and friends, and the mockery of her sisters would meet the reality of her grace. And in that confrontation, whether they realized it yet or not, the world would see Amara for who she truly was, unapologetically herself. The morning air was thick with anticipation, carrying the scent of jasmine and the faint smoke of ceremonial incense from the backyard. Outside, the village stirred with life, the rhythmic beat of drums from the far-off courtyard, laughter of children darting between stalls, and the steady hum of relatives preparing for the day. Inside, Amara sat quietly, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns of her wedding dress, trying to steady the storm of emotions swirling in her chest. Her wedding day had arrived, and with it, a delicate tension that tugged at every nerve. Today she would step into the eyes of her family, her community, and her future. Her heart swelled with joy at the thought of the man waiting for her at the altar, a love steady and unwavering, yet anxiety crept along her spine like a cold shadow. She worried about her sisters, still simmering with judgment, still ready to criticize her choice. The room was alive with preparations. A seamstress adjusted the hem of her dress with precise movements, the fabric rustling like whispers in the quiet. The wedding planner moved gracefully, arranging trays of jewelry and ceremonial adornments, ensuring every bead, every bracelet, every piece of fabric reflected the richness of tradition. Amara's mother moved between the preparations, offering gentle words of encouragement, though her eyes betrayed worry. As her hands trembled slightly while applying the last touch of powder to her face, Amara's mind wandered. Should I have chosen something more conventional? Would they ever see me for who I truly am? The questions gnawed at her, shadows of doubt threatening to dim her excitement. Yet, beneath them burned a steady flame of courage, fueled by the countless stories of her ancestors, women who had walked boldly even when the world expected them to shrink. Outside, the courtyard shimmered with color. Guests had begun to gather, draped in vibrant African prints, each cloth telling its own story, each smile a reflection of joy and love. Flowers, carefully arranged in symmetrical patterns, perfumed the air, and golden sunlight danced over the polished wooden chairs. The drums called, steady and insistent, beating the rhythm of life, of community, of celebration. Amara's fiancé, a calm and steady presence in the chaos, appeared briefly in the doorway. His eyes met hers, and in that moment the world outside and the criticisms of her sisters faded. He smiled softly, a quiet reassurance that her choices were valued, her courage seen. Yet even his support could not erase the lingering tension she felt about her sister's judgment. The traditional rituals began, ceremonial blessings, symbolic dances, offerings of respect to elders. Amara watched with reverence as the generations around her honored customs older than memory, yet her attention kept drifting inward. The threads of anxiety and anticipation wove themselves into her thoughts like a tapestry she could not yet fully see. Her sisters appeared again, this time with the subtle scrutiny of those who had critiqued her for years. Their eyes flicked over every detail, the henna designs on her hands, the beads in her hair, the delicate embroidery on her dress. Amara felt the familiar prick of their judgment, the silent measuring of her choices against their expectations. She closed her eyes for a moment, inhaled deeply, and reminded herself, this day was hers, these choices were hers, and her identity could not be diminished by anyone's approval. A servant handed her a small mirror, and she looked at her reflection, at the proud chin, the steady gaze, the dress that carried both her culture and her individuality. Her heartbeat slowed, replaced by a quiet confidence. She was ready. The anxiety remained, but it no longer ruled her. The fear of judgment was present, but it was now only one part of a larger, stronger truth. She was beautiful, she was brave, and she was herself. The air outside seemed to shift as if sensing her resolve. Guests began whispering, not about the dress yet, but about the anticipation that something remarkable was about to unfold. The drums grew louder, signaling that the procession was about to begin. The moment she had imagined for years, the entrance, the first steps down the aisle, the inevitable confrontation of her sister's expectations, was almost here. Amara took one last breath, steadying herself in the silence of her own determination. I will walk in with my head held high. I will show them who I am. The ritual had begun, the day had begun, and she had begun too, stepping into courage, stepping into tradition, stepping into her truth. As the first note of the ceremonial drum rolled through the courtyard, Amara rose. Her dress shimmered with the warmth of the morning sun, each bead catching the light, each fold alive with her confidence. The whispers of doubt and judgment were there, yes, but they could no longer touch her spirit. The wedding day had begun, and so had the journey to silence, surprise, and eventual triumph. The courtyard doors opened with a gentle creak, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to pause. Every eye turned, drawn by the hush that spread like a ripple across the gathered crowd. Amara stood at the threshold, her hands lightly touching the fabric of her dress, feeling the weight of tradition and individuality wrapped in its intricate folds. She could hear her heart pounding like a drum echoing across the hall, matching the rhythm of the ceremonial drums outside. Her breath steadied. Today she was no longer the anxious girl doubting herself under her sister's scrutiny. Today she was the bride, proud, radiant, and unafraid. The golden morning light streamed through the open doors, illuminating the beads and embroidery of her dress, making the patterns dance like fire across her chest. It was more than a dress. It was her story, woven with courage, stitched with pride, a symbol of the woman she had become. Sada's eyes widened first, her carefully composed face faltering for a moment. The eldest sister, usually so controlled, now blinked, struggling to comprehend what she was seeing. The sharp edge of judgment that Amara had known all her life wavered, replaced by something unfamiliar, shock. Lila's mouth fell open slightly, her laughter trapped somewhere between disbelief and awe. She tilted her head as if trying to see the dress from every angle, hoping to find a flaw, a reason to scoff, but there was none. The vibrant African prints, bold yet elegant, the delicate beadwork, the flowing fabric that seemed to float around Amara like a halo, it was undeniable. She looked magnificent. Nia's expression was the hardest to read. Quiet and calculating, she had always been the sister who struck with subtle cruelty, but even she could not mask the flicker of astonishment that crossed her eyes. For the first time, Amara saw hesitation in her, a crack in the armor of judgment she had built. The crowd's murmurs rose, a gentle wave of awe and excitement. Amara stepped forward, her sandals whispering against the polished wood of the courtyard floor. With each step, the dress shimmered, the intricate embroidery catching light and shadow, telling stories of ancestors, of resilience, of a heritage she embraced fully. The drummers outside intensified their rhythm, their steady beats echoing her own heartbeat, guiding her down the aisle like a river flowing toward the sea. She felt the eyes of the villagers, family, and friends, all fixed on her. And she felt something more, the eyes of her sisters, her longtime critics, locked in stunned silence. They had expected hesitation, perhaps fear, maybe even tears, but not this. Not the quiet, undeniable power of a woman standing in her truth. Amara's fiancé rose slightly from the altar, his smile warm and steady, his hands folded in quiet pride. He had seen her strength in private moments, her courage behind closed doors, but now it was for the world to witness. And in that moment she felt the full weight of his unwavering support, and it gave her a fierce clarity. She was untouchable in this moment, not in arrogance but in authenticity. Every detail of her dress spoke of who she was. The bold African patterns, the layers of silk and beads, the flowing train that trailed softly behind her, all seemed to hum with life. The colors, deep crimson, rich gold, and hints of emerald, glimmered with sunlight, each hue a note in the symphony of her courage. This dress was not just attire, it was a declaration. I am proud. I am unafraid. I am myself. The sisters' initial smug expressions, so familiar to Amara, had dissolved into shock, confusion, and finally, silence. Sada's arms tightened around her body as though bracing against the impact of the sight. Lila's jaw worked, words trapped in her throat. Nia's lips pressed into a thin line, struggling to process the undeniable truth in front of her. The mockery they had once wielded so easily had no place here. It was powerless against authenticity. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Elder family members whispered to one another, nodding in approval at the elegance and strength she exuded. Younger cousins and friends stared wide-eyed, admiration spilling from every gaze. The sound of gentle gasps and soft whispers filled the air, like waves rippling across the courtyard. Some women dabbed their eyes discreetly, moved by the sight of a bride who carried both tradition and individuality with grace. Amara's steps were slow and deliberate, each one measured yet light, as if the floor itself had become part of the rhythm of her heart. The train of her dress swayed gently, catching the sunlight, each bead sparkling like a constellation on her body. She could feel the unspoken tension in the air, the mix of pride, awe, and the remnants of judgment she had learned to anticipate all her life. But it no longer intimidated her. Each step forward was a claim. I am more than their expectations. I am more than their critiques. Her eyes briefly met Sada's. For the first time in years, she did not shrink under that sharp gaze. Instead, she met it steadily, unafraid. In that look, Amara saw a flicker of understanding, or perhaps a hint of admiration buried under layers of conditioning. She did not wait for it, did not demand it. She only continued, graceful and unyielding, letting the dress speak louder than words ever could. Lila's attempts to find fault faltered. The smirk she had carried for years had vanished, replaced by the helpless realization that her sister was radiant, unstoppable, and fully in command of her own story. Nia's silence was heavier, layered with disbelief and something akin to respect, a rare acknowledgement that Amara had grown beyond their judgment. The whispers of guests, the nods of elders, the quiet gasps of admiration, they formed a chorus that accompanied Amara as she reached the altar. Each step was a testament to resilience, to courage, to the beauty of embracing oneself fully. Her fiancé extended his hand, and when she took it, it was not just a gesture of union, but a recognition of the battle she had faced to arrive at this moment. The air felt electric. Every person present seemed to hold their breath, sensing that something significant had just occurred. This was not merely a bride walking down the aisle, it was a woman claiming her narrative, challenging expectations, and turning years of doubt into a spectacle of grace. Amara's gaze swept the crowd, finally resting briefly on each of her sisters. The silence between them was heavy, loaded with unspoken acknowledgement. She did not gloat. She did not mock. She simply stood, poised and serene, a living embodiment of her choices, her heritage, and her courage. And in that serene power, her sisters recognized something they had rarely seen, the unshakable strength of someone who refused to be diminished. She took a final step forward, standing beside her fiancé, and the crowd erupted softly in applause and cheers. But it was not just the celebration of a wedding, it was a celebration of identity, of resilience, and of a young woman who had taken every ounce of criticism, every moment of doubt, and transformed it into triumph. In that moment, Amara understood something profound. The mockery she had endured for years, the whispered criticisms, the comparisons, it no longer mattered. She had faced them not with anger but with dignity. She had turned every whispered doubt into an undeniable statement of power. And in doing so, she had done more than walk down an aisle. She had stepped into her full self, radiant, fearless, and entirely unapologetic. The grand entrance had done what she had hoped it would. It had silenced the mockery, captured the awe of everyone present, and, most importantly, affirmed to herself that her courage, her heritage, and her identity were worth celebrating. Amara looked once more at her sisters. The expressions on their faces had shifted from judgment to shock, and perhaps, just perhaps, a hint of respect. She did not speak, no words were needed. Her walk, her dress, her presence had said everything. And as the drums outside slowed into a steady, celebratory rhythm, she realized that this moment was only the beginning. Today she was not just a bride. She was a testament, a reminder that authenticity and courage could illuminate even the darkest shadows of doubt. The applause and whispers of admiration had faded into a soft hum, but the tension between Amara and her sisters lingered like a heavy fog. She stood beside her fiancé, hands lightly clasped, feeling the warmth of his reassurance. Yet her gaze returned to her sisters, Saad, Lila, and Nia, each caught in a moment of stunned reflection. Saad was the first to speak, her voice hesitant, stripped of its usual sharpness. Amara, I didn't expect. Her words faltered, unfinished, swallowed by the weight of the truth staring back at her. There was no mockery in her tone, only an awkward attempt to reconcile years of judgment with the undeniable elegance and confidence of the bride before her. Lila's mouth opened, closed, and opened again, searching for a witty remark but finding none. You look, she began, finally settling on the simple truth, beautiful. It was not the mocking praise she might have given in the past, but genuine, almost reluctant admiration. Her laughter, which had once cut like a knife, had vanished, replaced by silence and contemplation. Nia remained quiet longer, her hands twisting in front of her, lips pressed into a thin line. At last she spoke softly, almost a whisper. I see now. There was no explanation, no apology, only a rare acknowledgement that the woman standing before her had earned a respect she had not anticipated giving. Amara's chest lifted slightly, a quiet relief settling in. This was not a moment for confrontation and anger, it was a moment for dignity, for grace. Years of criticism, whispers, and subtle undermining had shaped her, but they would not define her. She stepped a little closer to her sisters, her voice calm but strong. I know this dress is different, she said, letting the words hang in the air. I know it isn't what you expected. But it's me. And today I am proud of who I am, and I will not shrink to fit anyone else's expectations, not even yours. Sada's eyes softened, and she looked away briefly as though ashamed to meet Amara's unwavering gaze. I suppose we've been hard on you, she admitted, her tone hesitant but sincere. Maybe too hard. There was no excuse in her voice, only a fragile honesty that had rarely surfaced in their years together. Lila shifted uncomfortably, her hands twisting at her sides. I never realized, she murmured, how much we've undermined you. Her words trembled with both guilt and wonder. She had seen the bride, her sister, unshakable, radiant, and confident, and it forced her to reflect on her own behavior over the years. Nia, ever quiet and observant, finally stepped forward, lowering her gaze. You've always been strong, she said softly. Even when we didn't notice. Even when we tried to bring you down. There was an unspoken weight in her tone, an acknowledgement that Amara had survived more than they could imagine. Amara felt a surge of emotion but held herself steady. This was not the time for anger, not the time for old grievances. She understood now that the confrontation she had long feared had transformed into a moment of recognition, not just for her sisters but for herself. The years of doubt, the sting of criticism, the quiet battles of self-worth, all of it had led to this, a space where her identity could no longer be questioned. She took a slow, steadying breath. I don't expect perfection, she said, her eyes meeting each sister in turn. I only hope that you can see me for who I truly am. That's all I've ever wanted. Her words were soft, yet carried the weight of every moment she had been underestimated, every criticism that had stung, every time she had doubted herself. Her sisters looked at her, each processing in her own way. Sada's shoulders relaxed slightly, the tension in her jaw easing. Lila's eyes glistened, a flicker of tears betraying the realization of the hurt she had caused. Nia, still reserved, nodded subtly, a quiet gesture of acknowledgement and perhaps a promise of change. The room felt lighter somehow, as though the unspoken tension that had shadowed Amara for years was finally being released. The mockery had lost its power, replaced by a fragile but growing respect. And Amara, standing tall in her radiant dress, felt a quiet triumph. She did not gloat, nor did she demand apologies, she simply allowed the moment to exist as it was, a testament to her courage, her dignity, and her unwavering self-respect. A distant cousin, who had watched the exchange quietly, whispered to another guest, "She carries herself like a queen. I've never seen anything like it." The words were a small ripple, but they reinforced the quiet truth Amara had always known. Her strength was her own, independent of anyone else's approval. Amara's mother stepped closer, her eyes misty. "You've grown into such a strong, beautiful woman," she said, voice full of pride. "And today the world can see it too." Her hands rested gently on Amara's shoulders, grounding her in love and familial support. As the sisters lingered, unsure of how to proceed, Amara realized something profound. She did not need their full approval to validate her identity. Their recognition, tentative though it was, mattered less than the quiet certainty she felt in her own heart. Every choice she had made, the dress, the rituals, the courage to walk in fully herself, had led to this moment of empowerment. For the first time in years she felt truly unburdened. The fear of judgment no longer ruled her. The criticism that had once haunted her was now powerless. And in that clarity she discovered a new kind of freedom, the ability to love herself fully, even in the presence of doubt, even before the eyes of those who had once diminished her. The sisters exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. They had witnessed a transformation not just in the bride but perhaps in themselves as well. A subtle shift, an acknowledgement that the years of quiet rivalry and judgment had finally met an unshakable spirit, and that recognition could not be ignored. Amara smiled faintly, a small gesture that carried immense weight. She did not need to speak further, the room had already understood. Her journey had been long, her path uncertain, but this moment crystallized everything she had learned: dignity, courage, and the power of remaining true to oneself. As she turned toward her fiancé, ready to continue the ceremony, she felt the light touch of her mother's hand on her arm, the subtle nods of supportive cousins, and most importantly, the quiet, tentative acceptance of her sisters. The confrontation had ended, not with anger or tears but with realization. A realization that would linger in their hearts, reshaping their perception of her strength, her individuality, and the remarkable woman she had become. And in that silent understanding, Amara felt something more, a profound sense of peace. She had faced the judgment, met it with grace, and emerged stronger. The day was hers, the love was hers, and the courage to stand unshaken was hers alone. She stepped forward, hand in hand with her fiancé, ready to embrace the celebration, the music, the dancing, and the life ahead. The sisters followed, hesitant but changed, and Amara knew that this moment, the confrontation and the quiet realization, would be remembered as the turning point. Not just in her wedding day but in the story of who she was and who she would become. The air in the courtyard was alive with music, laughter, and the bright colors of celebration. Drums echoed rhythmically, calling the community together, their steady beat matching the joyful pulse of the day. Amara, now fully radiant in her wedding dress, walked among the guests with a lightness she had not felt in years. Every step was a quiet affirmation of her courage, a movement of triumph over doubt, a dance of individuality embraced. The courtyard shimmered with vibrant African fabrics. Women wore bold prints in blues, oranges, and golds. Men adorned themselves with intricately patterned shirts and tunics. Children ran between the rows of chairs, their laughter mingling with the melodic songs that floated on the wind. The scent of roasted maize and spices from nearby cooking fires drifted through the air, mingling with the delicate perfume of jasmine flowers that lined the ceremonial walkway. Every detail spoke of heritage, of tradition, and of a community coming together to honor love. Amara felt a surge of pride and relief as she took in the scene. The worry that had clouded her heart that morning, her sister's judgment, the anticipation of whispers, the fear of inadequacy, had begun to melt. She caught sight of her sisters from across the courtyard. Saad, usually stern and unyielding, was watching her with something softer now, a quiet curiosity replacing her criticism. Lila's sharp eyes, which had once danced with mockery, now lingered on Amara with admiration and surprise. Even Nia, ever subtle, had a faint smile, an acknowledgement that her sister's strength was impossible to ignore. The festivities began in earnest. Guests rose and formed a circle as drummers pounded in unison, creating a hypnotic rhythm that resonated through the earth. Amara's father stepped forward, raising a hand to quiet the crowd. His eyes gleamed with pride. "Today we celebrate love," he announced, voice steady but warm. "We celebrate courage, tradition, and the joining of two hearts. And we celebrate a daughter who has shown us the power of being true to oneself." The words brought a lump to Amara's throat. She felt the eyes of her family, friends, and community upon her, not in judgment but in recognition. She had walked through criticism, doubt, and anxiety to stand here fully herself, and now the celebration reflected that transformation. The dancers began to move in synchronized patterns, their vibrant skirts swirling like living rainbows. Drums thundered, feet stomped in rhythm, and the crowd began to clap and sing along. Amara and her fiancé stepped into the circle, their hands entwined, moving gracefully to the music. The dress flowed around her, a living tapestry of color, beads, and heritage, each movement catching the sunlight and reflecting it back into the eyes of the onlookers. Her sisters followed, still hesitant at first, but gradually they began to mirror the joy of the celebration. Sada's shoulders relaxed as she clapped to the beat. Lila's laughter returned, this time genuine and light as she joined in the dance. Nia's subtle smile grew, and she began moving gently to the rhythm, acknowledging her sister's grace without the need for words. Watching them, Amara felt a sense of quiet victory, not because they had praised her, but because they were beginning to recognize her strength in their own way. Amara's heart swelled as she looked around. Friends and family approached to congratulate her, each smile and word reinforcing the truth she had carried all along. She was radiant, unshaken, and worthy of celebration. Cousins who had witnessed her childhood struggles nodded with respect. Neighbors, elders, and community members whispered admiration for the boldness of her dress, the poise in her steps, and the undeniable courage she exuded. Every glance, every gesture, every acknowledgement became a thread weaving together the tapestry of her transformation. She felt the presence of her mother beside her, who placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You've always had this strength," she said softly. "We just didn't always see it. Today everyone sees it." Amara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She had felt that strength within herself for years, but hearing it acknowledged out loud, by those she loved, was both humbling and affirming. The music grew louder, more insistent, calling for movement, celebration, and joy. Amara and her fiancé led the dance, their steps in harmony, a rhythm of shared love and commitment. The crowd followed, circling them, clapping and singing, creating a sea of color and motion that seemed to lift the entire courtyard. Her sisters slowly became fully immersed in the celebration. Saad moved with deliberate grace, learning to let go of judgment and simply enjoy the moment. Lila twirled, laughing freely, shedding layers of sarcasm and doubt that had burdened her for years. Nia, ever the quiet observer, allowed herself small movements in rhythm with the music, a subtle acknowledgement of her sister's brilliance. Amara felt a profound sense of empowerment wash over her. The transformation was not just external, it was internal. She had carried the weight of criticism for years and now it had lifted. Every smile, every glance, every step in her dress was a declaration of freedom. She realized that celebration was not just about the rituals, the dancing, or the music. It was about claiming her space, embracing her identity, and stepping into joy without apology. The guests cheered as Amara's aunt, a respected elder in the community, lifted her hand in recognition. "She has walked this day with courage," she proclaimed. "She has honored tradition while embracing herself. Let this be an example to us all." The applause that followed was deafening, a chorus of respect, admiration, and love. Amara's heart swelled with gratitude and pride. She glanced at her sisters once more. Their expressions had softened completely, replaced by awe, acceptance, and perhaps a newfound understanding of who she was. There was no need for words, action spoke louder. Lila hugged her tightly, whispering, "You are incredible." Sada's nod was solemn but proud, and Nia's subtle touch on her shoulder carried quiet respect. The transformation she had hoped for, the shift in perception, had begun. Amara knew this day would stay with her forever, not only for the joy of the wedding but for the profound realization that she had risen above doubt, judgment, and fear. The celebration was not merely an event, it was a reflection of growth, courage, and empowerment. She had stepped into her own power and invited the world to witness it, and in doing so she had transformed the hearts of those around her. As the sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over the courtyard, Amara danced with her fiancé, her sisters, and her community. Every movement, every laugh, every joyful tear became part of a story that would be remembered, a story of self-acceptance, resilience, and the beauty of embracing one's truth. In that moment, Amara realized that transformation was not about changing others, it was about embracing herself fully, radiantly, and unapologetically. And so the celebration continued, a living testament to courage, individuality, and the undeniable power of a young woman who had chosen to walk her path with grace, dignity, and joy. The music had faded into a gentle hum, replaced by soft conversations, laughter, and the occasional clink of glasses. The wedding had passed its peak excitement, and the guests began to settle into smaller groups, sharing stories, reliving moments, and congratulating the couple. Amara sat quietly for a moment, the soft glow of lanterns brushing her face, the weight of the day finally settling in. Her heart was still racing, though now it was not with fear or anxiety, it was a steady, contented beat, filled with the warmth of accomplishment. She had faced judgment, criticism, and doubt, and she had emerged whole, radiant, and unshaken. The transformation was not only evident in her sisters but also in herself. For years she had measured her worth by the approval of others. Tonight she had measured it by her courage and integrity. Saad approached her first. There was still a carefulness in her step, a subtle hesitation, but it was tempered with sincerity. "Amara," she said softly, her voice stripped of its usual sharpness. I'm sorry for the times I made you feel small. I see now how strong you are, how beautiful you've always been." Amara looked at her sister, noting the shift in her eyes, no longer judgmental but open, vulnerable, and honest. She took a deep breath, feeling the years of resentment and hurt loosen in her chest. "Thank you, Saad," she replied gently. I've always wanted you to see me not as someone to compare or judge, but as me. That's all I've ever asked. Lila stepped closer next, her expression tinged with both shame and admiration. I wasn't always kind, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I judged you unfairly, and I realize now how wrong I was. You've always been incredible. There was no flourish, no excuse, just truth quietly spoken. Amara felt the warmth of forgiveness beginning to settle in. She had prepared herself for continued tension, for lingering resentment, but instead she encountered honesty and humility. She placed a hand lightly on Lila's arm. It means a lot to hear that, she said softly. I don't need perfection, only understanding. And you've given me that today. Nia remained quiet for a moment longer, her eyes reflecting a depth of thought and self-reflection. Finally she spoke, her voice steady but gentle. You've shown us all something important, she said. Strength isn't just about being bold or loud, it's about being true to yourself even when it's hard. You've reminded me of that. She paused, offering a faint, genuine smile. I hope I can learn to be more like that. Amara's chest swelled with emotion. This was not the easy forgiveness of words spoken lightly, it was the recognition of change, the acknowledgement of growth in herself and her sisters. For the first time she felt a true sense of family healing, not because past wrongs were erased, but because honesty, understanding, and love had begun to replace judgment and resentment. Her mother approached, placing both hands gently on Amara's shoulders. You've brought us together in a way we didn't expect, she said softly. Not just through this wedding, but by showing courage, integrity, and grace. Today we celebrate not only your union but the strength of our family. Amara nodded, tears welling in her eyes. The years of striving for approval, of navigating subtle rivalries, had shaped her, but tonight that past felt lighter. She had claimed her space, embraced her identity, and in doing so had opened a path for her family to follow, a path toward understanding, respect, and unity. The sisters lingered nearby, still absorbing the events of the day. Sada's expression was contemplative, as if replaying the morning's judgments and the shift that had followed. Lila's laughter, now soft and warm, filled the air as she shared a memory with a cousin, subtly demonstrating that her attitude had softened. Nia's quiet presence radiated thoughtfulness and a willingness to change, an acknowledgement that her sister's bravery had left a lasting impression. Amara rose, moving toward her sisters with a gentle, unhurried grace. She extended her arms, and for a moment there was hesitation, but then Saad stepped forward, followed by Lila and Nia, and they embraced. It was not a perfect, tearful reconciliation, but it was real, an honest acknowledgement of the past and a tentative bridge toward the future. You've taught me so much today, Saad whispered into Amara's ear. About courage, about standing firm, about being yourself. Lila nodded, her voice quiet but sincere. I hope I can carry that with me, she said. I hope I can be braver, kinder, and more understanding. Nia's touch was light, her words almost shy. I respect you, more than I ever realized, she admitted. Thank you for showing us the way. Amara felt a sense of completion, a quiet satisfaction that resonated deeper than any celebration could convey. The journey had not been easy, and the scars of judgment and rivalry were still there, but the healing had begun. It was not about erasing the past. It was about embracing growth, understanding, and love. As the evening settled, the family gathered around for a quieter moment of reflection. Amara watched her sisters, her mother, her father, and even extended relatives as they shared stories, laughter, and gentle advice. The once tense air was now filled with warmth, understanding, and subtle admiration. Her fiancé took her hand, a gentle squeeze reminding her that this day was a testament not only to love but to resilience and authenticity. You've done something incredible today, he whispered. Not just for yourself but for all of us who care about you. You've shown that being true to who you are is the greatest strength of all. Amara smiled, feeling the deep truth of his words. Today had been about more than a wedding, it had been about transformation, growth, and healing. She had faced criticism, judgment, and doubt, and she had emerged stronger, radiant, and fully herself. And in doing so, she had created space for her family to reflect, change, and begin to heal alongside her. As lanterns flickered in the soft evening breeze and the distant music played a gentle rhythm, Amara realized that her journey was far from over, but a profound shift had occurred. Her sisters had begun to see her, not as someone to critique or compare, but as an individual with strength, courage, and grace. The past tensions had not disappeared entirely, but they had been softened by understanding, acknowledgement, and the quiet power of authenticity. Amara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day settle into her bones. She looked around at her family, her sisters, her parents, her friends, and her community, and felt a surge of gratitude. They had witnessed something remarkable today, something more than a wedding. The emergence of a woman who had embraced herself fully with dignity, courage, and love. In that moment she understood the true meaning of family healing. It was not about perfection, nor was it about instant reconciliation. It was about honesty, understanding, and the willingness to grow. And as she looked at her sisters, she saw the first glimmers of that change, a reflection of her own strength mirrored back at her. The evening continued with quiet celebrations, gentle laughter, and the soft glow of lanterns illuminating faces filled with joy and admiration. Amara felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the confrontation, the triumph, and the celebrations had all contributed to a transformation within herself and her family. She had not only claimed her day, but she had also begun to reshape the dynamics of love, respect, and understanding that had long defined her relationships. And as the night deepened, with music and conversation blending into a soft, comforting rhythm, Amara knew that this moment, the reflection, the quiet acceptance, and the tentative steps toward healing, would remain with her forever. It was a reminder that courage, authenticity, and grace could not only change one's own life but also illuminate the hearts of those around them, fostering growth, love, and family unity. The wedding had passed, but its echoes lingered in every corner of Amara's life. The courtyard was quiet now, the lanterns dimmed, and the guests long since gone, but the lessons of that day shone brighter than any celebration. Amara and her fiancé walked hand in hand through the quiet garden behind her family home, the soft scent of jasmine lingering in the evening air. The colors of her dress had faded with the hours, but the feeling it had carried, the boldness, the pride, the declaration of self, remained vivid in her heart. Her sisters followed a few steps behind, moving more freely than they had in years. Saad, once strict and critical, now walked with a subtle softness in her gaze. Lila, whose laughter had often cut others down, was light and gentle, her eyes reflecting warmth and admiration. Nia, reserved and careful with words, seemed thoughtful, her posture relaxed, as though she were considering the woman her sister had always been, bold, resilient, and true. Amara took a deep breath and felt the weight of the past lift further with each step. The journey had not been easy. Years of judgment, whispers, comparisons, and subtle undermining had shaped her life. But she had faced it all with courage, choosing dignity over defiance, authenticity over appeasement. That courage had not only defined her wedding day but had begun to redefine her family's understanding of who she was. Her mother, walking alongside them, glanced at Amara with pride. "You've done more than just marry today," she said softly. "You've reminded us all what it means to stand firm in who you are. Your sisters, your family, your community, they've all seen the strength you've carried all along." Amara smiled, feeling the truth of her mother's words resonate deeply. The wedding dress had been more than fabric and beads. It had been a symbol of her journey, a tapestry woven from courage, identity, and the refusal to shrink in the face of criticism. Each pattern, each stitch, each vibrant color had reflected a story she had lived, a strength she had claimed. And the legacy of that story was only beginning. Later that evening, the family gathered in the living room, a quieter, more intimate space than the bustling courtyard. The air was warm with familiarity and the lingering joy of celebration. Her sisters sat together, speaking softly with one another, occasionally glancing at Amara. There was a subtle shift in their dynamic, a newfound respect and curiosity about the woman they had once tried to diminish. Saad reached out and gently placed a hand on Amara's arm. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice tentative but sincere. "We've judged you for so long, maybe because we were afraid to face ourselves. Today I see you. I really see you. And it makes me want to change too." Amara's heart swelled. She did not need perfection or complete approval. She needed acknowledgement, and here it was, honest, reflective, and transformative. Lila nodded, her eyes glistening. "I want to be more like you," she whispered. "Not in dress or appearance, but in courage and honesty." Even Nia, usually the quiet observer, leaned forward, her gaze steady. "You've always been the strongest among us," she said softly. "And today you've taught us that strength isn't just in surviving but in living authentically. I hope we can follow your example." Amara felt a warmth bloom in her chest. The journey of self-discovery, of standing firm in her choices, had created a ripple effect, touching not only her own life but the lives of those closest to her. It was not about defeating her sisters or proving them wrong. It was about showing them, and herself, the power of authenticity, dignity, and courage. The days that followed were gentle yet profound. Her sisters began to engage differently, with less judgment and more openness. Conversations that might have once been laced with critique became exchanges of curiosity and support. Saad asked for advice on her own personal style, Lila shared laughter without sarcasm, and Nia observed with newfound thoughtfulness. The family dynamic, once strained with rivalry and unspoken resentment, began to shift toward understanding, empathy, and respect. Amara and her fiancé moved into their new home, carrying the lessons of the wedding day with them. Their life together was grounded not only in love but in authenticity and mutual respect. Friends and community members often reflected on the wedding, not just for its beauty or cultural significance, but for the quiet, profound statement Amara had made about courage and individuality. The story of the bride who silenced criticism with grace became an example for others, particularly younger women in the village, showing that identity and confidence could shine brightly even in the face of doubt. The dress, now carefully preserved, became more than a garment. It became a symbol. In quiet moments, Amara would touch the fabric, remembering the tension of her sister's initial reactions, the awe of the community, and the triumphant feeling of walking fully into herself. It was a legacy of courage, a reminder that the right choices were not those that appeased others, but those that honored one's own heart and heritage. Over time, her sister's respect deepened. Saad learned to temper criticism with empathy, recognizing the strength of others without diminishing herself. Lila's laughter became a source of joy rather than judgment, her playful spirit now grounded in admiration and love. Nia's quiet presence evolved into active support, offering insight and encouragement when before she had remained skeptical or detached. The family, once fractured by subtle rivalries and jealousy, began to knit itself together in new ways, stronger, wiser, and more loving. Amara understood that true healing and transformation were not instantaneous. They were gradual, a weaving of understanding, reflection, and forgiveness. And as she reflected on her journey, she realized the profound truth she had learned: courage was contagious. By standing firm in her identity, by embracing her individuality with dignity, she had illuminated a path for others to follow, not by force but by example. Even in the broader community, her story became a quiet inspiration. Young women who had once felt constrained by expectations began to see new possibilities. Mothers shared the tale of Amara's courage, and children asked questions about the significance of each bead and pattern in her wedding dress. Her courage had transcended a single day, leaving a mark that would endure, quietly shaping attitudes and inspiring others to embrace themselves fully. As months passed, family gatherings were no longer shadowed by judgment or subtle rivalry. Conversations flowed freely, laughter was genuine, and the bonds of love strengthened. Her sister's growth mirrored her own, showing that courage and dignity could inspire change, even in hearts that had once been critical. The wedding dress remained a symbol, not of defiance but of identity, respect, and the quiet power of standing true to oneself. Amara often reflected on that pivotal day. She remembered the nervous excitement in the morning, the critical whispers of her sisters, the rhythmic beating of the ceremonial drums, and the moment the world seemed to pause as she walked down the aisle. Each memory carried weight, not of shame or fear, but of triumph and revelation. She realized that her journey had not only changed her life but had subtly shifted the lives of those around her, creating a legacy of courage, authenticity, and self-respect. In quiet moments, she thought of the lessons she wanted to leave behind: the value of standing firm, the importance of embracing one's culture and identity, and the power of dignity and grace in confronting criticism. Her wedding had been a personal milestone, but it had also become a communal lesson, a reminder that authenticity could inspire, uplift, and heal. And as she looked to the future, Amara felt a profound sense of peace. The woman she had become was unshakable, not because she had silenced others, but because she had embraced herself fully. Her journey, her choices, and her courage had created ripples of change that extended far beyond herself, touching her sisters, her family, her community, and perhaps even generations to come. In the soft glow of evening, Amara stood at the window of her new home, gazing at the horizon. The sky was painted in hues of gold and crimson, echoing the colors of her wedding dress, of her heritage, and of the vibrant life she had embraced. She whispered a quiet acknowledgement to herself: "I am proud. I'm strong. I am free." Her sisters, watching her from across the courtyard, nodded in silent agreement, not just because of the day's events, but because they had seen the truth in her eyes. The truth that courage, self-respect, and authenticity could change hearts, strengthen families, and leave a legacy that would endure. And so, the story of Amara, the bride who walked with dignity, who silenced mockery with grace, and who embraced her identity fully, became more than a tale of a wedding. It became a lesson in courage, a celebration of individuality, and a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and family. A reminder that true strength is not in winning approval, but in honoring oneself, and that the legacy of such strength can ripple outward, inspiring others to do the same. As night settled, the stars reflected in her eyes, and Amara felt the quiet, enduring truth of her journey. She had claimed her day, her dignity, and her identity. And in doing so, she had created a story, her story, that would inspire, uplift, and endure far beyond the walls of the courtyard, far beyond the events of a single wedding day.